Good afternoon. We will go ahead and call to order the special meeting of the Cobb County Board of Elections and Registration for today at 12:30 p.m. We'll take the agenda in the order in which it's presented, barring any proposed amendments. Has everyone had an opportunity to approve the agenda? Or I'm sorry, has everyone had an opportunity to review the agenda? Yes. I will note one amendment or modification in as much that we need to take a vote to move the August regularly scheduled meeting, previously scheduled or currently scheduled for August the 14th, moving it to August the 21st. We'll take that prior to that vote prior to the public meeting. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So moved.
Is there a second? It's been moved by Mr. Bruning, properly seconded by Ms. Fisher to to approve the amended agenda. All those in favor? The motion passes unanimously. We'll go ahead and open up for public comment. Turn this on mute. Mr. John McLean. And public comment will be 5 minutes per person.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. McLean.
Good afternoon. My name is John McLean. First thing I just want to note, I wish we'd say the Pledge of Allegiance, but that's just a comment that I just came up with just right now. I want to speak on the lawsuit. So I'll start off by saying these days I see and read things that disturb me. I see the Democrat Party pursuing opponents by attacking them through the courts. I see burning and looting in the name of politics. I see censorship of political opponents. The goal of these actions is to increase power. Anything, even illegal things, are justified to increase Democrat control and power. But this board is supposed to be nonpartisan. Our voting rights are sacred in this county and in this country. Our elections are supposed to be free and fair. Politics is not supposed to exist on this board, but it has members who are appointed mostly by Democrats. 4 out of the 5 board members were appointed by Democrats. The same political party that justifies all legal and sometimes illegal actions to pursue power. The Cobb County School District is an elected board and is currently controlled by Republicans. In their pursuit of power, Democrats have tried to challenge every move made by the majority. They have tried to remove the current superintendent. They have even tried to challenge the school district accreditation. These efforts have not succeeded. So in the past I wondered what was coming next. So now along comes the ACLU, the SPLC, and other left-wing activists to challenge in court the lawful district maps for the school board. These activists sued both the school board and this Board of Elections, challenging the state maps. The school district defended themselves by arguing the merits, and the case against them was dismissed. The co-defendants, this board went a different route and challenged technicalities and failed so far in defending the law themselves and this county and the taxpayers from this lawsuit. The school district and even the judge appear to be scratching their heads, wondering why this board chose not to defend themselves and the county taxpayers in the same way as did the school board. And frankly, so am I. Knowing that the Democrats will do anything to win, is a lack of a competent defense in this case really just to disguise the effort to take over the school board? The chair of this board says she doesn't want to be bullied and that the board is neutral in the attack of the maps and the school board by the activists. But her actions and sometimes her words seem to indicate otherwise. It was reported in the MDJ article that the school district's legal team suggests that this weak defense of this lawsuit is intentional. and suggests possible collusion with the left-leaning activists and plaintiffs. Is this board that is supposed to be nonpartisan willing to ask taxpayers of Cobb County to pay thousands or maybe even millions of dollars in what is a real effort to intentionally lose this litigation just so that they can control the school district? Fire its superintendent? Replace the Republicans on the board with Democrats? I hope not. I'm amazed that the chair spoke to the press during the ongoing litigation. Why didn't she defer the questions to her board's attorney? Furthermore, is she speaking for this entire board? If not, we have a new problem. Are her motives for handling the questions herself and the poor defense of this lawsuit intentional? I ask that when you go into executive session, that you contemplate these things that come out of your meeting with every intention of defeating this lawsuit and defend the county and keep your promise of being nonpartisan. Many will be watching. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. Ms. Grubbs?
Good afternoon. My name is Sally Grubbs, and I'm the chairwoman of the Cobb County Republican Party. There's a couple of issues that I'd like to address, and one of them, many of the things that I want to address, Mr. McLean addressed, but also I would like to say that Janine Evler announced her retirement in January, and here we sit today at the end of July with no elections director. That job was posted, if I'm not mistaken, for 2 weeks and then taken down. And I think that the board is acting with careless disregard for the value of our elections to not have someone to administer elections and to do the administrative actions that need to be done. This is reckless, and this needs to be corrected immediately, and frankly, I'm disgusted. First of all, is when it comes to the position of the board with regard to the Cobb School Board, I'd like to know, was it put to a vote before the board on what your position is? As it said in the Marietta Daily Journal article, quote, "We are a nonpartisan administrator of elections. We have no say-so in how the maps are drawn, and to suggest that we are in a position to defend the maps as to whether they are the result of gerrymandering, we just lack that ability," according to Ms. Silas. What I would like to say is you have an obligation to follow the maps that were passed by the legislature. You have an obligation to defend those maps and to administer elections in accordance with the same. However, I understand that because of the litigation with the Cobb Commission, that you are preparing to follow the commission maps. And that is a big issue, because as it relates to the Cobb School Board, you have an obligation to defend the Constitution of the state of Georgia and the United States of America, and you have an obligation to administer in accordance with the law. The law is what you need to follow, and it's really offensive that the statement, "We are not going to be bullied into taking on their fight, we are a nonpartisan, etc. administrator," no one's trying to bully you. They're simply asking that you follow the law. And it seems to me that there is some kind of discussions going on between the commission and the Board of Elections, and that should not be. Your obligation is to the people. I know that I am not owed any kind of particular obligation, except I am a citizen of this county, and we are entitled to be treated in accordance with the law. So I ask that you follow the law with regard to the Board of Education, and that you do what you're supposed to, and not be taking steps to change voter roll information just at the whim. It causes a great deal of confusion. Lastly, I would like to say that you need to aggressively find someone capable and nonpartisan who can administer our elections under your supervision. It's not up to you to administer the elections yourself. We are owed someone to actually do that, and I would ask that you please be more effective in your job search. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grubbs. Moving on to the next item on the agenda as amended is a vote to reschedule or to move the August 14th meeting previously scheduled for this board to meet to August the 21st. Is there a motion on the floor?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Is there a second? Thank you, Ms. Effort. It's been moved and properly seconded to reschedule the meeting as previously noted for August the 14th to August the 21st. Is there any discussion? There being none, all those in favor? The motion passes unanimously. The next item on the agenda is the public meeting portion. We have a number of individuals that have joined us from the county today, and this public meeting portion is really to discuss the vacancy as noted, or the continuing vacancy as noted by those individuals that spoke during public comment. And as we have previously addressed during this meeting, we undertook a search process. We did not find a candidate that we believe to be adequate with regard to experience to come in as the elections director. And we are now, this board voted to appoint an interim director, but we also voted on that day to undertake a new search process, and as part of that, we would engage a search firm. I just want to go ahead and acknowledge members of county leadership that are presently with us. We have our county manager, Dr. Jackie McMorris. We also have our director of HR, Mr. Jim Garner, and we've got members of Cobb County Procurement and Mr. Roger Ball, as well as Ms. Stephanie Bryce, that will be speaking with us today. So we'll start out with our county manager, Ms. McMorris, if you'd like to join us.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members. Welcome to our newest members. Appreciate your service, first of all, and thank you. So what I wanted to just say today is that we here at the county support your efforts to find the most suitable and appropriate director. It has been noted that it has taken some time, and you are right. This is not unusual when you're trying to find a candidate or a director with specific skill sets. We've often had to go out several times for directors for particular positions, so that part is not unusual. My role here today is to say that we support you in that effort in any way that we possibly can. We recognize that you have asked for the services of the county to help in this process. And so members of the staff will be here to talk to you about what the process of engaging with a professional recruiting firm would look like, and to also better understand what the scope of work will entail and how long that process will be. So I'll just stop here and just ask if the board members have any questions of me regarding this process before we turn it over to those who will be actually engaged in helping you to find your director.
Thank you, Dr. McMorris. Does anyone have questions? Make sure your mic's on.
I do have just one question that came up at the last board meeting. As far as the additional cost for hiring a search firm, is that able to be approved by you as county manager, or does it have to go before the board? Because there was some controversy as to the process.
Sure. What we typically do is look at salary savings, first of all, Ms. Fisher, to see if within the budget we already have that's been approved by the board, then we try to stick within that savings structure. Ms. Eveler has been gone for a while, as been noted, so there have been some salary savings within that particular line. However, I just want to assure you that it is a very competitive process to find anyone who wants to do this work in this day and time. So as we look at this process and we look at the scope of work, we will be working with this recruiting firm to see what is the demand? And basically what we have to do oftentimes is, here's what we have available that's approved by the board. But if the salary is outside of that amount that's been approved by the board, and the demand in the market is there, then we will bring that back to the board to approve. But if it's already approved, then it is within my authority.
I was actually referring to, and I think I confused Dr. Gibson as well last month, this month, earlier. It's actually the fee for the search firm that I'm referring to. So how is that a fee applied? Is that within what you're talking about as well?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank
Most of
you.
the firms, and they'll talk about this in a second, would charge between 20 and 30% of the salary of that individual. We recognize, however, that time is not on our side, right? The demand for such a position is not on our side. There are very, very few, and we've done a national search already and found that there are very few people, again, who want to work in this space. For the comparable salary that we're offering, it's also very challenging to find someone to do this work for that. So regardless, I think I can speak on behalf of the board in saying that we're committed with you to make sure that we get the right person for this job. And if that means then that we have to come back before the board to ask for appropriations for additional funding, then that is also what we will do. Thank you. You are welcome.
Thank you, Dr. McMorris. Does anyone else on the board have any questions for Dr. McMorris?
Thank you for the opportunity, and we look forward to helping you all move this process forward as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Dr. McMorris, and we appreciate the support of the county. So we'll now move on to Mr. Ball and Ms. Bryce from Cobb County Procurement.
Okay, good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members. My name is Roger Ball, Director of Purchasing for the county. With me is my colleague, Stephanie Bryce, the Deputy Director. So we've put together a short brief on securing a third-party firm to recruit for and find us a quality and capable elections director. And we have a timeline. We have some milestone points as well that comprise all of the activities that are going to need to take place between now and the time frame when we make a selection. We're estimating that time frame to be 9 to 12 weeks. I'll let Stephanie speak to the details regarding the timeline that we put together.
Thank you, Roger. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members. As Roger said, I'm Stephanie Bryce. I'm the Deputy Purchasing Director. I do have a handout.
Please.
For everyone. I don't know. Can I just come down there and give them to you?
Absolutely.
Okay. And we can put that one up on the board as well. 2, 3, 4. There are 5 of you. There's 5. And you just put this one up here? Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
This is kind of like a one sheet of a summary that kind of gives you the high points of what I'm going to go over. So we have discussed, obviously, and you've heard Dr. McMorris mention it as well, and you guys have mentioned it as far as this is an aggressive timeline. So within Cobb County purchasing policy, we suggest using what is called a National Purchasing Cooperative Program to engage a search firm, a recruiter, to help fill this position. We suggest using the Omnia Partners Public Sector Cooperative Purchasing Program. And just, I can do real quickly, what a cooperative purchasing program is it's a national program that puts out solicitations. Lead agencies actually put out solicitations. So other government agencies put out solicitations, like for example, Cobb County, puts out a solicitation for themselves, but also in a national capacity that then is available to local, state, regional governments nationwide to utilize, and it follows policy because it has been competitively solicited. So these programs are out there for governments like Cobb County to use. In this case, Omnia Partners has a cooperative contract with a company called Insight Global LLC. It was competitively solicited by the University of California system in 2021. Insight Global was founded in 2001, and luckily for us, they are headquartered in Atlanta. Their headquarters are right over off of Hammond Drive. They have locations in 35 states, DC, and the United Kingdom. So they have plenty of locations that could assist with helping, for this search. Some of their government clients are the state of Kansas, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the Louisville Jefferson County Metro Government, the University of California, Berkeley, the University of South Florida, and the Charleston County School District. They have served these governments in multiple different capacities as far as staffing and recruitment are concerned. Insight Global does a lot of things, and this is one of them. So I want to talk about the timeline. This search timeline is hitting the high points. There would be details, obviously, within each of these bullet points. And this is an estimated timeline that we, as the county, have estimated. Obviously, some of these bullet points could take a shorter amount of time or a longer amount of time, so this timeline can vary. But we think this is a good estimate to tell you how long this process could take. The big part of this process is number one, identifying and discussing in detail the requisition and the requirements, the scope of work for this position. We obviously have the job description from HR that Jim has given us, but we also know that there is more to that. As we all know with any job description, there's more to than what is just on a piece of paper when you're applying for a position. So that we estimate is going to take 2 to 3 weeks in conjunction with number 2, which is confirming the funding for this. As Dr. McMorris said, Insight Global has told us that their fee for this would be 20% of the salary. That is 7 to 12% less than the industry standard. We have done some calling around, and a lot of local firms generally offer, it's a 30% fee. So this is a considerable savings in this case for what they would charge us for this position. Oh, again, we expect 2 to 3 weeks on that as our estimate, depending on obviously how long that first initial step takes. That we estimate that the dedicated recruiter search could begin mid-August, and that would take 3 to 4 weeks. And that is when Insight Global, with a dedicated recruiter, would go out and source candidates and seek out, people for this position that might be, viable candidates for an interview. We anticipate the interview process could take a couple of weeks. Obviously, with scheduling and things like that, that could change, whether they're on the phone, in person, what have you. And then we anticipate onboarding would take 2 to 3 weeks. Again, that goes to the entire process estimate that we have of 9 to 12 weeks. And we've anticipated a start date, building in a candidate having to give notice, and leave a current position, obviously, that they could start at the end of October. That is our tentative timeline based on what we know.
Thank you, Ms. Bryce. I do have questions, but I generally defer to my colleagues to raise any questions that they may have first. Yes, go ahead.
If the recruiter comes back with a handful of candidates and,
It's on. She just needs to pull it up.
is that better? If the recruiter comes back with a handful of candidates, we interview them and we find that they're not the right person, does the contract with the recruiting firm allow us to continue to identify more candidates past that round of interviews?
Yes, there would be, as this is a cooperative contract, we could continue to use them. And I believe from what the talks that I've had with them, which is not necessarily who the recruiter would be, but on the business development side, they're committed to finding us the right candidate as long as it takes,
That's it.
Thank you, guys. This is fantastic. I appreciate the timeline and that. I'm curious, do you know if Insight Global has any experience in the election space specifically?
I do not for a fact. I know that they do a myriad of things. They have different divisions that handle different things. I do not know if they're specifically in the election space, to be honest. But I know that they do have experience in seating high-level, high-profile candidates and high executive management positions for other positions that aren't necessarily election-based.
And have we used them in the past?
We have not.
Okay.
That's why I did check and get some governmental references to see the the types of governments that they've been dealing with and at what level.
Great. And were there other, you came up with this as your final candidate. I assume there were other sort of firms that you looked at or other structures?
The majority of other cooperative contracts that are for staffing are for what would be considered like temporary staffing.
Okay.
There are other staffing companies on contracts. Even Omnia has some others, but those are more for, in all honesty, like the temporary staffing contract that Elections has, where we have like administrative clerical positions, warehouse positions. The staffing companies that are on other cooperatives are generally that type of work, not like an executive recruiting firm.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Go right ahead.
Do you know if they personally seek out the candidates for this position through a database or whether they just use job boards? A lot of search firms do just use job boards.
I don't. I think in all honesty, that would be definitely something to discuss. They have the first bullet point is identifying and discussing in detail the requisition and the requirements. I would also see that meeting as almost being what we would call like a kickoff meeting to discuss, okay, how do you recruit for this? How are you handling the search? Are you just posting to job boards? My guess is no, given the large global type of company that they are, is that they have, especially with having so many offices in so many states, that they are reaching out differently as opposed to just posting it on a job board, yes.
Which is a great segue to my second question. Kind of doubling back to Ms. Mossbacher's question on their election experience. Typically, the search firms I have worked with in the past have a list of candidates in a specific industry. And most of them are either familiar, or at least familiar what a good candidate looks like. Can we get clarification on this prior to, I would really like to know the answer to that question, which was a great question, as well as whether they use job boards or point-to-point contact, because I think those are two huge differentiators.
So the prior elections recruiting experience and then the how do they post? Do they seek out candidates or just post to job boards?
Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
absolutely, yeah.
And I think if we're going to circle back on the election experience, we probably want to verify that it is higher level management election recruitment, right?
Not
Versus-
line staff kind of
Exactly,
experience. Yeah, absolutely.
exactly.
One thing I will say as well, that this is a cooperative procurement. I mean, this is a highly competitive process because multiple public agencies are going to the market. And once it's very competitive. And so the vendor that's selected, I mean, they have experience identifying, quality and capable candidates at the senior level in public organizations and at the exec level. But again, as Stephanie said, we will find out if they have any elections-specific experience. Okay, we can't answer that, but I mean, I can tell you their experience across the board in hiring at the senior level and exec level is broad.
And I will add that in response to this solicitation, when the University of California put this out, they received responses from 49 firms and awarded to Insight Global. And since it was from the University of California system, not a specific school necessarily, I have no doubt that they did their due diligence of just everything, But I will gladly check and we'll get back to you. on
Thank
this.
you.
You're welcome.
Did you have questions? See? No? Okay. I do have a couple of questions. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank both of you for your presence here today, as well as for the information that you've pulled together and the way in which it's been presented. I greatly appreciate that. With regard to the recommendation, just so that we're clear, why are you proposing the use of this? Like, what benefits do we receive in connection with leveraging this cooperative purchasing program?
As opposed to doing an RFP and
That's
seeking out a
correct.
firm and, okay. This timeline is 9 to 12 weeks strictly with us using a cooperative. If you want to do an RFP and issue a solicitation and then evaluate multiple respondents, you are probably going to look at another, conservatively, 3 to 4, possibly 6 months before we even get to this 12 weeks. An RFP has to be out on the street for a minimum of 4 weeks. Then you have an evaluation committee that, depending on how many responses they get, have to evaluate. And that could take anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks. Then if they want to do finalist interviews, you could be looking at another several weeks depending on scheduling. And then that would actually then, of course, to approve the award of that would then have to go to the board, and they only meet twice a month, so you have to meet those deadlines as far as agenda items. And so the scheduling of that could lengthen the process by many more months. Whereas this, because it's been competitively solicited and meets policy, we can immediately go with a firm, and we're only looking at this part of the process as opposed to the other part.
Essentially, the contracting to the process of identifying the firm and then the process of contracting with that firm as opposed to leveraging a contract that's presently in place that is the result of a competitive bidding process. Am I correct? Okay. Then with regard to a scope of work, obviously we met such that I could invite you to this meeting. And again, I appreciate your presence here. Does the Cobb County Procurement Department presently have a scope of work that can be leveraged that it has used for previous engagements of recruiting or national recruiting firms?
We have not.
Okay.
No, the county has not.
Okay.
We have not done a solicitation like this before.
Okay. Excellent. Those are the questions that I have. Go right ahead.
I'd just like to make a comment and a question, and one question. I'm delighted. My nightmare was that we were going to get into a process of recruiting and interviewing and several months' time used just to get to the first phone call. So I really like this package and this timeline. Now, I do have some concern that the recruiting firm has elections experience. We've seen before when election experience isn't put as the primary selection factor that things fall apart, because this job totally requires election experience. And that really is going to mean that the recruiter needs to know what they're talking about when they're making those phone calls. And so I don't know, I'm sure the rest of the board feels like I do, that we need to be very comfortable before we go down this path with their experience, their elections experience, and their ability to come back to us with good candidates. We've already spent 6 months trying it the old way, and that didn't turn out as well as we wished it had. So I'm delighted with the schedule. I think it's a great idea. I'd much rather spend time talking to candidates and interviewing them and selecting them than doing the same thing for the recruiting firm. But we need to know that they have solid elections experience, and really we probably should know who the recruiter is and that they have that election experience. And we don't care whether they're here in Atlanta. If they've got somebody in Kansas City that has done this many times across the country, that's the experience we need, is the recruiter having knowledge of this industry and of this kind of position. And we look forward to hearing what you find out.
Will do. Not a problem. Thank you.
Tori, I have another
Of
question.
course, go right ahead.
The discussion prompts brain flow. In your conversations with the Omnia partners, do they have more than just this one search firm?
They don't. This is the only firm, this is the only contract like this that Omnia has. Like I
Okay.
said, the other contracts that they have are the temporary staffing type positions that I mentioned.
Oh, okay, so we wouldn't have an option of going back and say, hey. Okay, that prompts question number 2. Which is maybe not for you all, but more for Dr. McMorris. And that would be, are we required to go through procurement to find the recruiting firm? No offense to procurement. I'm with Steve. I really didn't think 9 to 12 weeks was possible, so I do appreciate this proposal.
So based on what we understand is your desire to get someone in here, hopefully before the end of the year, because you have an interim that's going to start next month through the end of December, if I'm not mistaken. This is the fastest, most proficient way that we could at least get the process started. As Stephen acknowledged, we tried it the way that the county normally does for directors, the way we did for public safety director, public services director, HR director. We tried it that way, and this is so specialized. So what I can tell you is that you all will have an opportunity to share your concern about the specifics of making sure that the firm, before we engage, that this is what we're looking for. And I think most firms know the difficulty in finding elections directors nationwide. This is not a Cobb County issue, right? This is an issue nationwide where people are really seeking the best of the best in this space. We call people, we tried to do it on our own, the team did, people that they had heard about who do this work. We weren't successful. So what we can say is that if you are not pleased with moving forward with the firm, we won't move forward. But it will delay the process because procurement has laid out, this is the quickest, most proficient way to do it. If you don't go this way, the only other way is through the RFP process. And I promise you, it will probably be March.
I'm familiar with the
Yeah.
RFP process.
It takes a while, right?
That's why I was
So-
hoping to circumvent it. Thank you.
But we are certainly going to make sure, and I know they probably already know when we inquired about this, that we shared, we're looking for an elections director, a top-notch elections director. We agree with you. We don't care where they come from as long as they are the best fit for the job and for Cobb. And we'll do whatever we can to help you all in that process. But
Thank
it is
you.
truly your decision. It is the Board of Elections' decision. We're here to help, but it is not our decision to make.
Thank you, Dr. McMorris.
You're welcome.
Did anyone else have questions for Ms. Bryce or Mr. Ball? Or for that matter, Dr. McMorris? Well, again, we thank you for your being here, and we appreciate the presentation. I will share some research that I have done with regard to other posts that I saw where a elections board was trying to find an elections director. So there are search firms that are out there that have public sector divisions. For example, Baker Tilly is one of them. I know that one of the metro Atlanta counties engaged Baker Tilly in connection with trying to find a director for that county. In that instance, I contacted Baker Tilly and asked them what type of experience they had in elections more generally. And I don't know that they didn't have a lot before they were engaged by that particular county. I believe to Mrs. Bryce's, because I anticipated this question, and it's a very legitimate question, but I believe to Mrs. Bryce's point, you've got public sector, or you've got divisions of recruiting firms that have a public sector division, but I don't know that there is an executive search firm that focuses only on elections or that has like a significant amount of elections. So I think we need to temper our expectations. They're very legitimate questions to ask. Another local search firm is GovHR USA. And again, they actually only focus on public sector. So unlike Baker Tilly, and it sounds like Insight Global, they have a public sector division, whereas this firm, GovHR USA, only focuses its search and recruitment in the public sector. But I thought it important to at least share some of the information that I intended to share with with all of you, as well as with our colleagues in Cobb procurement, as to whether there are search firms at the level that we're looking for that only do searches in the elections area, and it's just at the poll worker level. It's not in the executive level. So that being said, obviously, we would hope to circumvent, or not circumvent, but go through this 9 to 12 week process. And then obviously there is an onboarding process. And Mr. Garner is here with us from Cobb County HR. If you'll join us, please, sir.
Good afternoon, Jim Harner, Cobb Human Resources.
I apologize. I said Garner. I meant to say Harner. I apologize.
No, of course.
So obviously, Ms. Bryce and Mr. Ball have shared with us what the process would be. But at some point, there is a handoff to you and your team with regard to onboarding. If you could share with the board and the public, I guess, what your team would be responsible for and general timing once we've identified the candidate.
Right, sure, absolutely. So my team in HR would be involved to the extent you would like us to help facilitate interaction with you and the chosen firm all along the process. And then certainly, to your point, at the handoff stage, then the due diligence, background checks, that kind of stuff. Now, a lot of that will be conducted along the way with the search firm, depending on the scope of the contract. That they'll certainly check references and that kind of thing, but we'll dot I's and cross T's also in human resources at the end of the process. But we stand ready to help. I'd see our role here is facilitating, perhaps being a liaison to some extent for you all to the search firm. I will tell you, if I may, a little bit about timelines with search firms. I've worked with search firms in the public and private sector before, not specifically for boards of elections, but the process is similar for police chiefs, fire chiefs, city managers, those kind of positions. This is certainly an aggressive timeline, and I don't doubt it at all. It can work this way, but there's typically, and you all won't be surprised by what I'm saying, there's typically 2 points that slow down the process. One at the very beginning and one at the end. Now, I'm certainly in no way suggesting those should be rushed. They shouldn't. But if you want to keep to the timeline, to the extent that the search firm can get you all's consensus on what they're looking for and how quickly that can happen, that's the first crucial thing, to stick to a timeline that's anything like this. When I've done discussions with search firm, typically you're looking at more like 4 to 6 months is what they'll tell you up front. This is 3 to 4, doable. But again, I think that first step, I'm just telling you my experience. And then at the end, of course, when it comes time to select between hopefully a number of candidates, again, that's typically, as we would expect, a point where things can slow down. But I just wanted to share what my personal experience is on 6 to 8 of these over my career, not with elections, but they've all followed that kind of pattern. So,
Thank you, Mr. Harner.
sure.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Harner? Well, I do appreciate your presence here as well as your partnership as we move forward. Thank you.
Okay, look forward to working with you on it. Thank you.
Likewise, thank you. Just with respect to the process as we move forward, does anyone have comments or concerns they want to raise before we move on to the next item on the agenda?
I do have a concern on the job description itself. I know if I were applying for the job, I probably would skip over it because it's very long. It's a long read. There, in my opinion, is a hurdle to jump over from the get-go. Just in fun, I did a AI job description and sent it to you all. I think it's much more succinct. It covers pretty much every high point. It doesn't get into the details. But I think they're planning on using the existing job description, and there are several things in there, for example, that are concerning to me. A, we don't require any election experience. We don't define what a critical business process is. There's just a lot of concerns I have about the way it's written. We also let them know that just because they have a criminal background doesn't exempt them from hiring. Several things like that that I think we need to take a serious look at.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. No determination has been made with regard to what job description we will use. And as Ms. Bryce made mention of, at least if we were to go with this, this search firm, or for that matter, any search firm, as these, I believe, are standard processes, we would be meeting with the search firm, specifically the recruiter, and drafting and working through a scope of detail, a scope of work, or the details in the requisition and its requirements. And obviously the requirements are also set forth in the job description. I did receive what you had proposed or provided using AI, and I defer to my colleagues, our colleagues, as to whether they have had an opportunity to review it, but I don't believe a determination has been made as of yet.
That was really just an example of narrowing it down and being a little more, not necessarily relying on AI. But I must have misunderstood Ms. Bryce, because I did think she said we have the job description.
She has the job description as it was drafted, because I believe, and I don't want to speak for Ms. Bryce, but I believe she needed to have something to communicate, to talk to Insight about, to get input from them. But Ms. Bryce, if you'll clarify, please.
Sure. You're correct. I sent the county job description to Insight Global as a starting point. I had to do that in order to find out what the percentage rate they would charge us and that type of thing. But that first bullet point on the timeline is where you will determine the full scope, basically, for lack of a better term, phrase, calling it a scope of work. You'll determine and really tell them, okay, in relation to this job description, what actually does this person do? And that's what you will draft together, and they will assist you in coming up with that. And you'll tell them what you want, and that will be actually what they use to search.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Bryce. Anything further before we move on with the next item on the agenda?
I just have a question. I'm curious, okay, so we have some questions that we're going to move forward with, but if we want to move forward, let's say we wanted to move forward with this, do we need to take a vote on this process right here? Is that what would be? I was trying to figure out how we go, what's next? I'm looking at time, right? How do we start this timeline?
Sure. So I was not here last meeting.
Right.
Greg was here, so I wasn't, and he's out of town this week. So I was hoping to get him, caught me up. But I wasn't sure what the motion was last month and if it covered the process or if not. But yeah, I mean, you would want to have some sort of motion approving moving forward with this process if there hasn't been one yet.
We did move to engage a search firm.
It was a general motion to retain a search firm to facilitate the process to find our new director.
That's sufficient. I mean, this is just filling in the details of the authorization that was granted last month.
Great.
Okay.
So then, for the scope of work piece, is that something that we want to sort of assign amongst ourselves to say like, okay, who's going to do that part and work, I feel like last time we kind of like.
That is
had
what
that-
we did
okay.
last time, less so with a scope of work, but with regard to the subsequent steps after we received applications, for example, as it related to doing the phone screens. I know that you and Mr. Gartland
Right, like we
conducted
made
those.
assignments. That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, we
Should
made
we sort of
assignments.
talk about what that looks like for this process at all? I mean, I don't know if that's premature. I'm just trying to figure out how we make sure that everybody's chugging along.
Yeah, absolutely. I would tend to, well, I guess what is everyone's preference? I know that there are questions that have been raised and with regard to getting input from our colleagues in Cobb procurement. They're going to provide that information back to us. So is it a matter where those questions that were raised, I didn't raise those questions, presumably you want that information before we move forward? You all raised the question, so I defer to you.
Personally, I would like to have the two questions answered, the one that Ms. Mossbacher asked about on election experience, and also, do they use point-to-point or job boards? Because using job boards, if all they do is go out there and post it on multiple job boards, we can do that. So I would like the answer. I assume we can get that via email?
Yes.
Because it sounds to me in this, if we're looking at the RFP versus this is our option, right? So this is really, in order to keep with this timeline, this is where we sit. 'Cause
That's why I raised the
Right, so to
question with
me,
regard to
I'm
why
good.
this was the recommendation.
Right, I'm okay. I'd like to know the answers to that because I think that might inform how we need to move forward and how we need to work with Insight Global. But I know they're a big player in this space.
They are.
So I mean, recognize the name. I know them as a big player. I just wanted to know, sort of peripherally, is there anybody who maybe has placed somebody with election work before that we could work with, that kind of thing. I'm personally fine to say today that this is where we're going to move because I think we got to get moving. I'm committed to that. That's me. I'm fine to go down the line. I just feel like I'd like to be decisive today with this process. That's my own preference.
Yeah, I would totally agree. As I said before, this is great news, and we need to jump on it and move forward with it because we need this election director in place desperately. And a 9 to 12 week timeframe probably is over-optimistic, but that's okay because that means maybe it's end of November instead of end of October, but it's still a hell of a lot better than end of March. So I'm very, very much in favor of proceeding with this plan.
And Ms. Snipper?
I agree. We don't really have another good option, so it seems like we would need to go with the search firm for time purposes.
And I also agree. I am familiar with Insight Global. My experience with them, they do use peer-to-peer as opposed to simply posting, but obviously I've not engaged them on this particular requisition. But in my prior experience, from a position that I held in corporate America, they do make, cold calls, for lack of a better way of putting it. They reach out to individuals that they do research on to try to identify opportunities. So that being the case, I believe, Ms. Mossbacher, you make a tremendous point with regard to identifying individuals that will be on point. Obviously, we'll be limited to 2 so that we can move efficiently forward. I'm happy to serve in that capacity as I served last time. I'm also happy to defer to one other person in addition to myself, or for that matter, to 2 other additional individuals.
This is going to sound self-serving, but I do think it needs to be a person from each side. Democrat and a Republican, just for the optics, if nothing else. So, not that I want to volunteer
you're
for another.
volunteering?
Well, shoot me, but it sounds like I am.
So Ms. Fisher?
And I think, I agree. I mean, I think when Pat and I did the phone screens, I felt like that was a good opportunity for, everybody to have input into that process. And I think that transparency is good. I think for this moving forward with the search firm, it makes a lot of sense. And designing the scope of work and the job description, that there be, universal input, but 2 people on point to get that process rolling.
So I'm a little confused, speaking of scope of work. You had said we had one we used previously.
No, I said that when we were previously looking at engaging a search firm, we were, we drafted, well, we were in the process of drafting one, but that process was abandoned, so it was not complete. But I did speak with Ms. Bryce and Mr. Ball to inquire, because I know, Mr. Bruning, you had raised a question, a specific request that we asked Ms. Bryce for anything that they'd previously used. And that's why we were drafting from scratch when we were initially looking at this process in the spring, because there was not one that we received from the procurement department, because they've not previously engaged this type of search.
So we don't have one
We have
existing.
the beginnings of one, yes.
Okay.
I don't think we really need a scope of work. This is already a contract.
That's correct.
Already arranged. We need to finalize the description for the position and clarify that, but I don't see any need for a scope of work or any other document created by this board. We just need to finalize the position description.
Right, and I think also just to manage expectations with respect to what we are looking for from a process standpoint. For example, when we were working with the county, there was a limitation on the timing within, or there were requirements to comply with county processes and procedures with respect to when we could receive applicant materials. Those requirements are not in place here. For example, once we align on how frequently we can align on how frequently they will reach out to us. It's not, once the position quote comes down, as was required when aligning with county process and policy.
So that will prompt another question to Ms. Bryce. Do they have any kind of brochure or proposal on the services provided at that 20%? I would assume that maybe Omni, since they've selected them as a select vendor, might have one that could be emailed to us.
And this may not be what you're asking. They have a standard, like it's an Excel spreadsheet of like a price list of positions that were officially awarded under this contract, but positions are, it covers any position, not just those.
Actually, I was asking about the services they provide, like whatever they would do if they were coming in to sell me on their services. Do they have anything that shows what they do?
Like a flyer or that type of thing, or like a line card?
Sales
like a vendor?
brochure,
Yeah.
proposal?
I'm sure they have something I could get you, yeah.
Okay, that'd be, I think, really helpful for us setting. If they fill all of the points we need, then we don't need to do anything ourselves, right?
But I also think that, yes, to a certain extent, but I also think whatever expectations that we have of this firm are to be communicated during that first 2 to 3 week period. So if we want to have a weekly touch base, that's something that could potentially be in a scope of work or a statement of services, i.e. that's one of our requirements for this requisition. If we have a specific directive to them, I know, Ms. Fisher, you'd identified a job board where the position could be posted, sharing that information with them. We're not necessarily doing their jobs for them, but I think that setting expectations with regard to how we anticipate or how we would like to see them conduct this search, to meet our expectations around the information, the timing, I think that's work. It may not result in a specific document, but I think we should communicate that information to them.
I think it would be very helpful to know what they do supply before we set our expectations. I mean, if it falls under certain categories that they do.
I don't disagree with you. I'm
Okay.
just suggesting that we may have expectations that are beyond that. I personally would like to have a periodic check-in with them. You know, for them, whatever their reporting is, if it doesn't align with what we would like to see, then that's where we would let them know, okay, if you don't receive any applications, you know, in the first week, then what are you going to do? Like, that's, as I understand it, the conversations that we'll be having in these first 2 to 3 weeks, again, to set expectations.
Well, just in my experience, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you, but in my experience, once we sign that contract, what they give us is what they give us, is that 20% fee. And if our expectations are up and above, that could be problematic after we agree to do business with them.
That's why we would talk about it during those initial 2 to 3 weeks before we sign the contract, or not
Right.
sign the contract, but
And I'll add
agree to the
this,
requisition.
on the, talking about the updates and everything, on the part of the recruiting search, they did give us, we gave you brief, high-level bullet points. I didn't feel the need to give you guys like a 2-page, like, you know, one sheet. Instead, I wanted to keep it to one. But they did talk about in their recruiting search, they do daily updates and weekly meetings as far as the recruitment search goes. So I definitely think that's one of those things to talk about in that first meeting is what your expectations are. And again, say, if you don't have any candidates in the first week, then we need to talk and what are you going to do? I will say this as far as contractually goes, that with Omnia, with any of their contracts, and with any national cooperative purchasing program, not just Omnia, the contracts that the lead agency, which in this case was the University of California, what they solicit is the binding, overarching contract for this contract that is offered through Omnia. Now, every one of those solicitations, and I can say this because Cobb County is a lead agency on 5 Omnia contracts. We hold separate ones. We don't hold one for staffing, obviously, but we hold separate contracts. And what the terms and conditions in those contracts always state that if they call it a participating public agency, so we would be that in this case because we're using their contract. If a participating public agency has more restrictive terms and conditions or additional things that they want you to meet that are within the confines of the contract, you as the awarded supplier do have to agree to them. So we're bound by a general, generalization of the contract, but we are allowed to say, these are some additional things that we would like.
So I would really like a copy of whatever it is that they do provide.
Okay, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
if you already have bullet points or something you use, that would be helpful as well.
Okay.
All right.
They've sent me some things. I'll go back and look and see what they've sent me. If it will suffice, if not, I'll reach out and we can ask them for some additional.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Price. And if, when you do have that, you'll send to the entire board, we greatly appreciate it.
Of course, yes.
Thank you. Anything further on this point? So I believe Ms. Fisher has volunteered to work with the firm in this first task for the first 2 to 3 weeks, aligning on the requisition requirements. Will Ms. Fisher be working with me or one of you? So we're on point, Ms. Fisher. Thank you. Is there anything further with regard to this process? Okay. Yes, sir. Mike, please, sir. CP has trained me well.
Here we go. I'm sorry, I had a question not related to the search, but the
Yes.
interim director, when will he begin?
So thank you for raising that point. As I've shared with the board via email and is speaking with Dr. Gibson, so the interim director had vacation, or the interim director, as we've appointed him, had vacation scheduled from the 19th through the 25th. Obviously, tomorrow is the 25th. In as much that he was coming out of retirement, there were certain steps that needed to be taken to be certain that he was fully apprised and comfortable with how his retirement would be impacted. And so I believe it's just a matter of when he comes back, we will, he'll be back tomorrow. We will speak with him and set a start date. Dr. Gibson, if you'll join us.
Good evening, afternoon. Jatan Gibson, Director of Public Service Agency for Cobb County.
Did you have anything further to add with respect to the start date for Mr. Miller?
Yes, so since you all voted to move forward with Mr. Miller, I've been working with HR and the county manager for two things to set the date. And we did agree that since he had already scheduled a vacation, we asked him to complete his vacation because he's going to be busy when he starts, and that we've been working with HR to look at his resume. He shared that with us, his experience, and tried to come up with a reasonable and fair offer for him for his time and service with the county. So that will be completed, and the offer letter will be written through HR and shared through the chairwoman and the board to go to him. So now my question is, though, did everybody want to see that before it's offered, or how do you all want to handle that?
If you'll just share the offer letter with the entire board for the sake of expediency, and I know that we'd spoken, there are some timeframes with Mr. Miller having been gone from the county for the amount of time that he has. He has to do some required training, am I correct? And there are specific dates upon which that training is offered, and I believe the next one is it the 7th of August?
That's the onboarding, yes.
Or the onboarding,
Yes.
That's correct.
Yes.
So my understanding is his return has to align with that timing.
Correct.
And so if you'll just share with us the earliest date on which he could return.
Yeah, the earliest is August the 7th.
August the 7th.
Yes, yes.
How
And at that
realistic?
point, he would actually be on board, starting the process, so that then he could have joined elections. But that day, August 7th, would be with HR.
And is that realistic that we could look at that as a start date, you think?
If he agrees, and I think he would, because the only thing he had was his vacation.
Okay, great.
Does anyone else have any questions, additional questions for Dr. Gibson? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And are there any other kind of general questions before we move into executive session? So we'll entertain a motion to move into executive session.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Bruning.
Can you give us a purpose for the executive session for the purpose of discussing pending litigation?
For the purpose of discussing pending litigation.
Thank you, Mr. Bruning. Is there a second?
Second.
All of those in favor? The motion passes unanimously. So thank you for those of you that have joined us. And if you are new to being with us for this meeting, when we move into executive session, we request, or actually require, that the meeting room be vacated by individuals that are either not on the board, or that are on the board, or that are otherwise have an interest in the litigation. Sure. I will entertain a motion to come out of executive session.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Bruning. Thank you, Ms. Fisher. It's been moved and properly seconded to come out of executive session. All those in favor? The motion passes unanimously. Just for the record, we'll note that our next meeting of the Board of Elections and Registration for Cobb County will take place on Monday, August the 21st. And with that, this meeting is adjourned at 2:58 p.m.
Great.